Have you ever felt that something is watching you even when you are completely alone? It's not paranoia, it's not imagination, it's the mind recognizing that there are forces so vast, so ancient, that the mere idea of their existence is enough to alter your breathing. And now I know for sure, one of those forces has found me. After the ground exploded open, after the titanic clash between the beasts of fire and ice, after the awakening of that colossus rising from the heart of the planet, my mind stopped functioning the way it used to. I don't know the exact moment when something inside me changed, but now I no longer see the world as a collection of rocks, roots and echoes. I see layers, pulses, buried heartbeats, currents of energy traveling beneath the crust. I see invisible cracks forming just before they break. I see shadows where nothing should exist. I don't know if I'm evolving or losing my sanity. The giant of the void was still there, suspended above the glowing fissure, as if floating between dimensions. It didn't walk, it didn't breathe, it didn't roar, it simply watched. And the fact that something so immense could remain so silent was more terrifying than any roar the other two creatures had made. The magma creature, wounded, retreated with a tremor that rippled through the ground. The ice creature, shattered, dragged its fragments away from the presence of the dark entity. But the giant of the void did not follow them. It did not see them as threats, because it was looking only at me. I felt something in my chest. Not pain, not fear, but a kind of recognition, as if an invisible thread connected me to the creature, as if I were a keyword that had just activated a buried code in the structure of the universe. I froze. I couldn't move a single muscle, not even blink. Then I felt its center, that core filled with stars and liquid darkness, begin to pulse. It wasn't a fast or violent pulse, but a deep, slow heartbeat, the kind a colossal heart buried in nothingness would make. Each throb vibrated through the air, bent the horizon, and forced my own heart to follow the same rhythm. It beat once. The ground rippled. It beat twice. The clouds split open. It beat 3 times, and something inside me awakened. It was as if my vision split in 2. For a moment, I saw the normal world, trees, rocks, darkness, the ruins left by the monster's battle, and at the same time, I saw another layer, a landscape of glowing lines, currents, invisible patterns, as if the world were a living map, a map of which I was a part. I thought I was dying. I thought my mind was cracking open. But then, I heard something, not with my ears, inside my head. A word, a single one, return. And I knew it wasn't my thought, it was its. The giant of the void, something that should not have a voice, or a shape, or an intention, and yet it did. When that word crossed into my mind, the sensation was so overwhelming that my knees gave out. I collapsed. But my eyes still couldn't turn away from the creature. It was like trying to look away from the sun, knowing it will burn you, but feeling that you must watch anyway, even if it consumes you. The heartbeat echoed again, louder. My hands began to tremble, my breathing quickened, and a dreadful certainty flooded through me. That being knew me. It had been searching for me, long before I was born, and now it had found me. Suddenly the abyss beneath it began to expand as if it were inhaling. The rocks around it were sucked inward, forming a spiral of earth and light. I crawled backward, but the ground moved as well. It felt alive. The creature itself didn't move, but something within the abyss did. Circular lights began forming inside it, like gigantic rings spinning in opposite directions. They were impossible geometric patterns, shapes that the human mind isn't meant to see. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. The glowing lines I had seen before, those invisible connections running through the earth, began drifting toward me. They weren't physical, but I could feel them brushing against my skin, my mind, my soul. It was as if the entire world were trying to connect to me, as if I were the central point of some ancient system that had just reactivated. I felt heat, cold, euphoria, terror, all at once, and then the void giant tilted its head, very slowly, as if observing me from a different angle, and that tiny movement was enough to make the entire planet feel as if it were tilting with it. The wind stopped. All sound vanished. Time seemed to suspend itself. And in that absolute silence, its star-filled core flickered, a dark, subtle blink, but enough to make my heart stop for a moment. Because that flicker wasn't random, it was a message, a recognition, a mark. In that moment, I understood something that broke me from the inside. I belonged to that being. If not now, then in a past I cannot remember. And if not in the past, then in an unavoidable future. My throat tightened. I felt nauseous. I felt vertigo. And then, a second flicker. Stronger. The ground split wide open. And something, a colossal shadow, an arm made of living darkness, surged out of the abyss. It was coming straight for me. The colossal arm of living darkness surged upward from the abyss, as if the planet itself were exhaling some buried nightmare. Its surface wasn't made of skin or shadow, but something deeper, something that looked like the absence of matter, a darkness so pure and so ancient that it seemed to drink the light around it. It moved without sound, without weight, without resistance, as though the world had been shaped for it, and it alone. When the tendril of void reached for me, the air thickened, bending around its form like molten glass. My lungs refused to function. My heartbeat slipped out of rhythm. My body felt as though it were being unraveled thread by thread, not physically, but spiritually, as if the creature were peeling away memories, fears, and pieces of my identity in search of the one it needed. The world around me ceased to exist. The crackling magma of the fire titan faded into a distant smear of red. The fractured ice beast dissolved into pale dust. The cavern, the fissure, the stones, everything blurred into insignificance. There was only me, and the thing calling itself toward me. When its shadowed limb neared my face, every atom in my body screamed in silence, warning me that to let it touch me would be to dissolve into an existence I was never meant to know. Yet I couldn't move. My own limbs belonged to the thing now, not to me. Whatever this entity was, it viewed my body not as a separate being, but as a misplaced fragment of itself, a piece it had the right to reclaim. The moment its form hovered inches from me, something impossible happened. A ripple spread outward from my chest, an instinct not born from courage or will, but from something far older than me. A force I didn't understand, a force that was mine, yet not mine. The ripple pushed against the entity's limb, bending it, distorting it, forcing it to retreat a fraction. The shift was tiny, nearly imperceptible, but enough to shock me, enough to shock it. The void giant's core flickered violently, like a star collapsing inward. The pulse that followed shattered the debris around me, reducing boulders to dust. Its entire form wavered, as if recalibrating itself, and for the first time since it appeared, it broke its stillness, not by stepping closer, not by retreating, but by simply adjusting its posture, shifting slightly backward, as though reassessing something it had taken for granted. I was not prey, not a mistake, not a fragment. I was something else. The realization terrified me more than being hunted. My chest burned, not from pain, but from resonance, as though something inside me were vibrating in response to the creature's pulse, as though I were awakening to the same rhythm that moved within the void giant's core. The ground trembled beneath me. The abyss expanded. The colossal rings of impossible geometry began spinning faster, their glow intensifying until the cavern was bathed in otherworldly luminescence. The air itself twisted as though space were being rearranged to accommodate the creature's will. The arm retreated into the darkness, as if melting back into the void, but not because it had abandoned its intention. No, it was shifting tactics, forcing the abyss to widen, to open itself like a colossal wound in the earth.
and from inside that wound, new shapes began to materialize. Not arms, not limbs, not faces, but forms, shapes too vast, too complex, too abstract to belong to any known species or dimension. Layers of shadow, spirals of ancient matter, tendrils of starless night, foes of shadow, spirals of ancient matter, tendrils of starless night.
The pulsed like veins belonging to a cosmic organism.
It was a gateway, a mouth, a wound.
The void giant was not alone. The fissure trembled as multiple silhouettes formed within it, each one flickering like distant galaxies trapped in liquid shadow. They pulsed with synchronized resonance, mirroring the rhythm of the giant above the abyss, and the realization struck me like a blade of ice. These beings were communicating, aligning, awakening, and every beat of their synchronized pulse affected me, pulling at something in my core, urging it to respond, to join, to harmonize. I resisted. I fought it. I clung to my sense of identity like someone clinging to a cliff's edge over a bottomless void. But my resistance didn't matter, because something else awakened within me, something I had never felt before, something that didn't belong to human memory. I felt the world expand. I felt the shape of the cavern, not in sight, but in sensation. I felt the pulse of the earth's crust, the circulation of the molten rivers beneath us, the fractures forming miles away, the ancient arteries of the world beginning to stir. And then, with horrifying clarity, I felt the void giant recognize that very awakening. Its core flickered again, not aggressively, but with something disturbingly close to satisfaction, as if it had been waiting for this, as if this had been my purpose all along. The abyss lurched outward like the opening of a colossal eye. The rings spun faster, generating winds that defied logic, winds with no air, no pressure, no temperature. They simply moved, because the being willed them to move. Then came the voice, not spoken, not whispered, not heard. Felt, return. The single word struck me again, but stronger this time, strong enough to bend my spine, strong enough to distort the world around me, strong enough to rip a soundless cry from my throat. The rings brightened. The void giant straightened its posture, and the abyss opened wider still. And then something happened that shattered the last remnants of my understanding. A beam of darkness erupted from the void. Not light, not shadow, a third thing. A substance that behaved like liquid, but traveled like energy, carving through the air without breaking it. It struck my chest. The impact didn't throw me backward. It pulled me forward, dragging my spirit out of alignment with my body. For a moment I felt detached from flesh, floating between physicality and something deeper. My vision doubled, then tripled, then narrowed into a single point. I felt myself being absorbed, not consumed, not yet, but tethered. The beam connected my chest to the abyss, and I knew what it meant. It was pulling me home, to a place I did not remember, a place I had once belonged, a place I was never meant to leave. My knees buckled, my arms hung lifeless, my head tilted forward involuntarily. The beam tightened. The rings accelerated. The void creature's core brightened to a blinding darkness. And then, something impossible cut through the abyss. A fracture, not the kind formed by earthquakes or stress. This one was made of pure white light, splitting reality in a line so sharp, it looked like the universe had been sliced open. The void giant froze. The rings halted mid-rotation. Even the beam attached to my chest flickered, and from that slab of luminous rupture, something stepped through. Not a monster, not a beast, not a shadow, a figure, indistinct, unclear, humanoid in shape, only because my mind forced it into something comprehensible. But its presence silenced the world. The void giant recoiled from this figure, as though facing an equal or a predator. The beam snapped violently, sending me collapsing to the ground, gasping, shaking, barely clinging to the remnants of my consciousness. The figure's head turned toward me, and the light from its form ignited every nerve in my body, causing a surge of memory, sensation and dread so intense I nearly lost my mind, because I recognized it, not from this life, not from any dream, but from a place deeper than memory, a place older than existence. The figure in the light raised its hand, the void giant roared, not audibly, but through vibrations that shattered boulders around us. The abyss shook violently, as the shapes within it writhed in panic, and then the figure pointed at me. Everything in the cavern, darkness, fire, ice, even time, bent toward that gesture. And in that single moment, I understood this figure was not here to save me, it was here to claim me. Just as the void giant had two primordial forces, two cosmic entities, both wanting the same thing, mad, for very different reasons. The night around me deepened, as though the entire cemetery were inhaling, pulling the world into a single vast breath that refused to be released. The shadows no longer behaved like shadows. They stretched and curved, bending around gravestones as if protecting them or marking them. I couldn't tell which. I walked between the rows, feeling something awaken beneath the soil, not physically, spiritually, like consciousness brushing against consciousness, as though the dead, for the first time since I began working here, were aware of me in a way I didn't understand. And then I felt it, a presence, not watching, following. It moved without sound, yet every instinct screamed its proximity. Whatever it was not the same entity from the mausoleum, nor the faceless thing that tried to peel its way into my mind in episode 3. No, this was colder, more aware, more intentional. I kept walking, pretending I didn't feel the shift in the world around me, because the rules had taught me one thing above all: acknowledging a thing you don't understand gives it power. Yet every step I took, the presence pressed closer, like a whisper against my spine. I reached the far northern edge of the cemetery, the oldest part, where the stones were cracked, sinking sideways, half eaten by moss. The air here always felt heavier, but tonight it was suffocating. The sky above this section had darkened unnaturally, like clouds had formed where the stars should be, and then I saw it, a figure, standing between two tilted gravestones, a tall, thin silhouette, its proportions wrong, far too long in the limbs, the neck, the fingers. It wasn't facing me, but even from behind, its presence was unbearable, like gravity trying to fold me inward. My first thought, this wasn't human. My second, it knew I was here. The back of its head twitched, once, twice, like something was adjusting its connection to a body it wasn't meant to inhabit. Then, it turned. Not fully, just enough. Its head rotated an impossible degree, stopping halfway, as if bones didn't matter. Even in the sparse moonlight, its face, or the absence of one, was clear. No eyes, no nose, a mouth made of vertical black slits, pulsing like gills, and skin too smooth, too pale, almost translucent, stretched tight across something moving underneath. The creature didn't walk toward me. It glided. Its feet hovered inches off the ground. Its arms hung loosely, but its fingers dragged through the air as if slicing through fabric. And its mouth slit parted slightly, releasing a sound that wasn't a sound at all, more like pressure squeezing your thoughts. I stumbled backward. For the first time since I started this job, I felt genuinely close to fainting. My legs trembled under me, and the world swirled in a silent vertigo that made the graves tilt even more than they already were. Then, a bell rang. Not the chapel bell, not the midnight bell from episode 1. This one was smaller, closer, sharper. It jingled with a metallic chirp, cutting through the air like a blade. The creature froze. Its head jerked forward, like an animal catching a scent. The bell rang again, and again. 3 times total. The creature slowly lifted its hand toward its own chest, tapping a silent rhythm on its sternum with its elongated fingers. 3 taps in the exact sequence of the bell. Then it vanished. Not gradually, not through motion. It simply wasn't there anymore. My breath shattered out of me. My vision blurred.
and for a moment I thought I would collapse right there in the dirt. But the bell kept ringing, faint, repeating, like something was being summoned. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. Not gliding, not floating, human. I spun around. An old man stood there, but not one of the visitors. His clothing was outdated, decades out of place. His skin looked tired, worn by more years than a human should realistically endure. His eyes were sunken but alert, glowing faintly and should realistically endure. His eyes were sunken but alert, glowing faintly in the moonlight.
He held something small in his hand, a bronze bell, dented, ancient, its handle wrapped in black cloth. "Don't let it mark you," he said. His voice was steady, but something in it trembled with familiarity, as if he had spoken this same warning to others many, many times before. My throat closed. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. "A groundskeeper," he replied. "Like you, before you." I blinked. That wasn't possible. But the manager never mentioned he wouldn't. The old man lifted the bell because he believes every new keeper must discover the truths on their own. That's how the cemetery chooses who survives. I swallowed dry, choking on the weight of his words. "The creature," I whispered. "What is it?" He took a long breath. "There are names," he said. "Old names, forgotten names. But the simplest one you need to understand is this. It is a collector." The air turned colder around us. "A collector of what?" I asked. The old man's expression darkened. "Of memories, of voices, of faces, of anything you fail to guard." He paused. "And if you let it get too close, it takes you." My chest tightened. He looked down at the bell. "This keeps them from choosing you too soon." "Choosing me for what?" He looked up, eyes heavy with truth. "For the role you don't yet know exists." Before I could speak, the earth beneath our feet throbbed, like something enormous had shifted underground. The old man grabbed my wrist. "We need to move." But before we could, I saw something rising between the graves. Hands, not decayed, not skeletal, hands shaped from dirt itself, long fingers forming out of soil and stone, crawling upward like vines. The old man clenched the bell. "Damn it, you were too close to the collector." It marked the ground. "It's calling them." "Calling what?" I cried. He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the ground split open and something began pulling itself out, something massive, shapeless, yet with the unmistakable outline of a torso, made of earth and shadow, dripping soil like dark blood. The creature rose, towering, its head brushing against the leaning branches of the dead oak tree above it. Glowing embers burned where its eyes should have been. The old man pulled me back, almost dragging me. "Run," he said. "It's a borrowed body." The thing let out a shuddering breath, a gust that smelled like old graves and fresh soil, and then it charged. The cemetery shook with every step it took. I ran. The old man ran beside me, but slower, much slower. His lungs wheezed, his legs trembled. He was too old for this, too worn, too broken. The borrowed body closed the distance with terrifying speed. I grabbed the old man's arm. "Come on," but he shoved me forward. "Go," he rasped. "You must reach the chapel. I'm not leaving you. You must." He lifted the bell with the last of his strength. "It's not me it wants, it's you." The ground exploded behind us as the borrowed body slammed its fists into the earth, launching dirt and broken stone into the air. Its roar shook the night, vibrating through my bones. "Run," the old man yelled. I had no choice. I sprinted toward the chapel, legs burning, lungs on fire, the creature's footsteps thunderous behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I only heard the old man scream, a scream that cut off so abruptly, so horrifyingly, that my blood ran cold. I stumbled, nearly falling, but I kept running. The chapel was only yards away when the shadows ahead of me began to move. Not human-shaped, not ghost-shaped, shapes like silhouettes torn from the ground, rising upright, stretching, bending, preparing to block my path. "No," I whispered, "not now." But they didn't attack. They simply stood, then parted, A pathway opened directly to the chapel door, like something was guiding me or herding me. I reached the door and slammed my shoulder against it, throwing myself inside. As soon as the door closed behind me, the chapel lights flickered on. Candles I hadn't lit, flames that burned with blue fire instead of orange. And at the front of the chapel, sitting alone in the front pew, was the little girl. The same one from episode 2. The same one who disappeared into the mausoleum. The same one who whispered warnings that hadn't made sense until now. Her eyes lifted slowly toward me. "You weren't supposed to see the collector," she said softly. "Not yet." My breath hitched. Why is it after me?" Her head tilted, unnaturally. "Because it remembers you." The candles flickered violently, and now the others do too. My heartbeat pounded so loud I could barely breathe. The girl stood. "You should sit," she said. "The night isn't done with you." I shook my head. "What is happening? What was that thing? Why did it take the old man?" "Why you're asking questions," she whispered. "You should be listening." She stepped closer. "Sit." My legs moved before my mind did. She turned her eyes toward the chapel floor. "The borrowed body will break through the door soon." My pulse spiked. "Then why are we staying here?" "Because you need to hear what comes next." She paused. "And because you're not ready to run from what wants you." I swallowed hard. "What wants me?" She lifted her eyes, and for the first time they seemed old, older than the cemetery, older than the dead in it. "A new entity," she said. "One that shouldn't be awake." Her voice trembled. "Something that knows your name." My blood froze. What is its name?" She leaned forward, her whisper colder than the grave. "It calls itself." The chapel door exploded inward, and everything went black. When consciousness returned, it did not return gently. It tore its way back into me like a tide of ice water crashing over a drowning man. Violent, disorienting. I opened my eyes to darkness, not pitch black, but a dense, suffocating half-light, like I was trapped between waking and dreaming, alive and buried. Shapes slowly formed around me. The wooden beams of the chapel ceiling, the flickering blue candles, the fractured door hanging on its last hinge, and the silence. A silence so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath again. My head throbbed as I pushed myself upright. Dust settled around me, floating like pale ash in the candlelight. The air pulsed with residual energy, as though something enormous had moved through the chapel, only moments before. The girl was gone. The altar cloth was torn. The pews were cracked. The floorboards near the entrance were splintered outward, as though something massive had entered, not exited. The borrowed body. It had broken through. It had stood right where I lay unconscious, and yet I was still alive. Why? My hands trembled as I reached for the nearest pew to steady myself. The whole chapel seemed to tilt slightly, my inner ear struggling against a residue of fear. But slowly, as the ringing in my skull faded, I became aware of something else. A mark on the floor, a blackened impression, shaped almost like a handprint. 5 long, claw-like fingers burned into the wood. The creature had touched the ground near me, not to take me, not to kill me, to warn me. But why would something like that need to warn anything? And why, of all people, would it warn me? The candles flickered again, dimming and swelling in unnatural patterns. They were responding to something, not wind, not movement, but presence. A presence that hadn't left the chapel yet. I wasn't alone. Every bone in my body tightened. I turned slowly, scanning the corners, the rafters, the shadows sliding along the walls. Nothing looked alive, yet everything looked watchful. The girl's last words echoed inside me. "It calls itself." The sentence had never been finished. But the force that blew the door open, that wasn't the borrowed body, that thing had mass, weight, intention. What struck the chapel was something else, something capable of moving through reality without obeying it, a stronger entity, a sentient one. and it wanted me. My breathing stuttered as I faced the altar. Something about the air around it shifted, like heat rising from pavement, but inverted, cold rising, waving, warping. The wooden podium cast a trembling shadow that didn't match the candlelight. There, behind the altar, something moved. Not a figure, not a shape, a distortion, a humanoid outline made entirely of the absence of light. Shoulders, arms, a long torso, but not solid, not physical. As if reality itself struggled to define it, the outline tilted its head, not inquisitively, but knowingly. It had been waiting for me to wake up. A faint vibration pressed into my skull, like a whisper too deep to hear, but too sharp to ignore. My heartbeat stuttered in response. The entity stepped forward without sound, its feet not touching the ground, its limbs stretching and compressing as though its form was still deciding what shape to adopt. Then it stopped, and the chapel grew colder. The candles extinguished one by one. Blue, blue, dark. Only one candle remained lit, the closest to me. Its flame trembled violently, bending toward the being as though drawn to its gravity. And then, a voice, not a spoken voice, not an audible one, a voice inside my mind, threading into thought as though it had always lived there. I found you. The air vanished from my lungs. The entity stepped closer, its form stabilizing for the first time. The darkness that composed its body deepened, contouring around it like thick ink suspended in water. I could see now that its head bore no features, just an outline of where a face should be. Still, I felt it looking directly at me. You stepped where you were not meant to step. You saw what you were not meant to see. The borrowed body, the collector, the shadows, the old groundskeeper. They hadn't been coincidences. They hadn't been random attacks. They had been reactions. Reactions to me. I tried to speak, but the words crushed themselves in my throat. The entity floated closer. The temperature dropped so sharply, I could see my breath fogging the air. The remaining candle surrendered to the cold and extinguished. Darkness swallowed us whole, yet I could still see the being. It didn't need light. Its body emitted a faint pulsing radiance, dark light like a void projected outward. And within that void, threads of something like memory flickered. Faces, shapes, screaming expressions, flashes of graves. It moved closer, until its form hovered only inches from mine. And then I felt it, a touch, not physical, mental. Something cold slid into my thoughts, searching, probing, cataloging. My memories flickered like pages in a burning book. The cemetery, the first night, the girl, the old man, the collector, the borrowed body. It saw everything. It invaded everything. I gasped, clutching my chest as a surge of dizziness overwhelmed me. The presence grew heavier, the pressure of an intelligence so ancient, so vast, so utterly inhuman, that my skull felt too small to hold even a fraction of its awareness. Then the voice returned, sharper now. You are not chosen. I blinked through tears of pain. Not chosen. Then why? The voice cut through my confusion. You were claimed. My pulse collapsed into panic. Claimed by what? By whom? By which entity? As if hearing the thought, the being's outline shifted, expanding, twisting into a larger form, its limbs elongating, its torso stretching until it towered above me like a monolith of shadow. The chapel creaked beneath the pressure of its presence. The collector marked your memory, its arms extended, fingertip shadows, tracing the air around my head. The borrowed body marked your path. The ground trembled lightly, as though responding to its words. The cemetery marked your purpose. Then it leaned in, its featureless face looming inches from mine. And I, the air snapped like breaking bone, marked your soul. A soundless impact struck my chest. I collapsed backward, gasping as a freezing sensation spread across my skin, sinking deep into muscle, bone, thought, identity. I tried to scream, but a force gripped my jaw and sealed my breath inside. I clawed at the air, eyes burning as I drifted into a half-faint, half-dreaming state. My vision fractured into shards of colorless static. Then, a memory surfaced, not mine, a memory of someone else, a previous groundskeeper. A life lived in shadows, a burial, a warning unheeded, a presence that never stopped hunting him. I felt myself drowning in foreign thoughts, trapped in memories not meant for human minds. The entity stepped back slightly, releasing my jaw enough for breath to return. But I didn't feel relief, only dread. The girl tried to protect you. She does not understand your role. Role, my thoughts spiraled. What role? I managed to force out. The being tilted its head once more, slowly, like a judge observing a prisoner. The role you were always walking toward. The role this cemetery has waited to fill. A long pause, then the role of its next keeper. My pulse froze. No, I whispered. No, I'm just a worker. I just dig graves. I quah. The entity didn't let me finish. You do not dig graves. You open doors. The floorboards beneath me quaked. The chapel walls groaned. Graves outside shifted, as though something beneath them was listening. My heart hammered so violently, I thought my ribs would crack. The being stretched an arm outward, a black flame ignited in its palm, cold yet burning through the dark. It pulsed like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. You were claimed, it repeated. And the claiming cannot be undone. Before I could react, the flame shot toward me and struck my chest. But before I could feel the impact, the girl appeared. Not walking, not running, simply there, between me and the entity. Her small form flared with sudden light, a blinding rupture of white radiance that tore through the chapel like a silent explosion. The entity recoiled, its shape fragmenting, its edges dissolving into ribbons of void. The girl turned toward me, her eyes no longer human, older, filled with something both divine and tragic. You weren't supposed to meet it yet, she whispered into my mind. The entity screamed, a sound that wasn't heard so much as endured. Then it vanished, not fled, not retreated. It simply ceased to exist. The girl collapsed to her knees, breathing hard as though holding back the entity's presence had drained something vital from her. I staggered forward, catching myself on the broken pew. What was that thing? I asked through trembling breath. Her answer was faint. The Harrod one. The name felt like a weight, sinking into my bones. She looked up at me. You don't have much time. My throat tightened. Time for what? For choosing, she whispered. The cemetery is waking, and every entity in it will come for you now. I shook my head violently. No, I won't be part of this. I don't accept any role. I refuse it. Her expression dimmed with something like sorrow. You don't have to accept it, she said. You already belong to it. The floorboards rumbled. The cold thickened. Something outside began scraping across the walls of the chapel. Thousands of somethings. And then the girl whispered something that made my blood freeze. This is only the beginning. The windows shattered, and the night poured in. The windows didn't simply break. They fractured under a pressure that didn't belong to sound or force. They shattered, as though the night outside had mass, as though darkness itself had grown teeth and claws, and a single ravenous hunger. Cold wind poured into the chapel, carrying with it a smell like damp soil, and something older, something metallic, ancient and heavy, like rusted iron soaked in blood and forgotten inside the earth for centuries. The candles were extinguished instantly, leaving only moonlight leaking weakly through the ragged holes where glass had once been. The girl stood with difficulty, her form shaking, her edges flickering, as though she wasn't entirely anchored to this reality. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the windows, every one of them, as if counting the shadows crawling inside. Not shadows, limbs. The scraping grew louder. A wet, dragging noise, like the sound of bodies being dragged across stone from every corner of the cemetery. My skin tightened as I realized the truth. The dead were arriving, not in bodies, not as ghosts, not as memories. Something halfway between them, consciousness trapped in decay, compelled by the force awakening beneath the earth. The first form slithered through the broken frame of the nearest window. Its shape was humanoid but stretched, elongated unnaturally, bones pushing beneath thin leathery skin. Its head tilted back and forth in a slow, jerky motion, like a puppet pulled by hands unsure of the strings. It stepped forward with a slow, staggering grace. Another followed, then another, then dozens more. Their movement was wrong, synchronized in spiraling patterns like an infestation, compelled by a single hive mind. Their limbs cracked as they moved, bones bending in ways no living body would allow. They crept toward us with a hunger that wasn't physical. Their hunger was for me. The girl placed herself between me and the advancing corpses. Her body glowed faintly again, not the blinding light from before, but a trembling luminescence, like a candle struggling against a storm. I felt her fear, not for herself, for me. The chapel shook as more bodies forced their way inside, crawling over pews, sliding through the aisles, filling the space with the sound of tearing cloth, cracking joints and low, rattling breaths that belonged to no living throat. A pressure built in my chest, a command, not spoken, felt. Something was calling me deeper, something beneath the chapel. No, beneath the cemetery. No, beneath everything. The harrowed one. Its mark pulsed in my chest, cold, circular, iron-like. It throbbed in time with the movement of the corpses surrounding us. Each heartbeat echoed outward like a beacon. They turned toward me with sudden, jerking precision. Their collective gaze locked onto the mark beneath my ribs. The girl sensed it too. She turned sharply toward me, eyes widening, not in fear, but in desperation. Her glow flared, illuminating the chapel in an explosion of white light. The corpses recoiled, hissing without sound, their flesh blistering under the radiance. But the girl's strength wasn't infinite. Her form flickered again, dimmed, fractured at the edges like a porcelain statue beginning to crack. She stumbled, her light sputtered, and the corpses sensed her weakness instantly. They surged forward. I braced for impact, but the floor split before they reached us, not cracked. Split. The chapel trembled as its wooden boards tore apart like old cloth, revealing dark soil beneath. The corpses fell into the opening, clawing upward, trying to regain their footing. But something beneath them moved, something vast and serpentine, shifting through the dirt with the fluid motion of a creature that had never known the surface. Then I saw it, roots, black, thick, pulsing roots. They burst from the soil, wrapping around the corpses' limbs, torsos and skulls. The bodies convulsed as the roots absorbed them, pulling them downward, consuming them in silence. Their forms shriveled, collapsing into dust, as if drained of all memory and meaning. The ground devoured them. The chapel shook harder as the roots retracted, dragging their prey back into the earth. Some corpses managed to cling to the pews, but the roots were patient. They slithered out again, coiling around their ankles, wrists and throats, pulling until bones snapped and resistance crumbled. Within seconds, the chapel was almost empty. Almost, because one corpse hadn't fallen. It stood in the center aisle, unmoving, untouched by the roots. Its head tilted to the side, as if listening to something I could not hear. Then its torso twisted unnaturally, rotating in a full circle before snapping back into place. Slowly, its skull lifted, its jaw hung loose. Its eyes were hollow, but something moved behind them. Something alive. Not the frost creature, not the molten titan, not the harrowed one. Something new. The corpse took a step toward me, moving with an eerie, confident grace unlike the others. It didn't stagger, it didn't twitch, it walked. It stopped only a few feet from where I stood. The girl trembled, summoning the last of her light, but the corpse didn't recoil. The light washed over it harmlessly, as though it were immune to her presence entirely. My breath caught. The entity inside the corpse wasn't trying to kill me. It was studying me. Then the girl spoke, not with her voice, but into my mind. That one belongs to something older, older than the harrowed one. My pulse stuttered. The corpse reached upward, cracking its neck with a clean, decisive snap. Its spine straightened, its skull tilted. It lifted one hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed at me. The girl staggered backward, her glow fading. "No," she whispered into my thoughts. "No, no, no, not it, not Ed, not Ed." The corpse stepped closer. The candlelight flickered erratically, shadows stretching across its face like the marks of some forgotten ritual. Its empty sockets fixed on me with a focus too precise, too intelligent, too aware. It opened its mouth. Dust fell out. No sound emerged. But I felt the message, a message that didn't come from the corpse. A message that didn't even originate in this world. A message pressed into my mind like a brand. The vault is opening. My legs nearly gave out. The girl's glow extinguished completely, leaving us in darkness. The corpse stepped closer, and then froze. Everything froze. The air, the dust, the candles, my breath. Time held itself perfectly still for a single, impossible moment. Not paused. Held, suspended by a force so powerful reality itself bent around its presence. Then the corpse head snapped upward, as though compelled by an invisible command. It turned. It looked toward the chapel entrance. So did I. Something stood there, but it wasn't a corpse. And it wasn't a creature. It was a silhouette. A human silhouette. But impossibly tall, impossibly still, impossibly wrong. A presence that made the harrowed one feel distant, secondary, subordinate. It stepped inside without a sound. And the corpse, the intelligent one, collapsed instantly, as though its animating force had fled in terror. The girl's voice broke inside my mind. "Run," but I couldn't move. Because the silhouette turned toward me, and I realized, with bone-shattering certainty, that the entity entering the chapel wasn't arriving. It was returning. Returning to something it had been waiting centuries to reclaim. Me. I continued walking through the darkened corridor, feeling the texture of the old hospital tiles under my feet, as if each one stored the memory of 1,000 patients who had passed over them. The building breathed faintly, a kind of subtle vibration running through the pipes behind the walls, like the pulse of something still alive within its decayed structure. The more I advanced, the more I felt the invisible pressure of eyes watching me from behind cracked doors and patient rooms that seemed frozen in time, each holding a stillness too perfect to be natural. There was an abandoned wheelchair at the far end, its wheels angled slightly inward, as if someone had left it in a hurry. I walked past it, and for some reason the air around it felt colder, as if the object itself retained the last moment of the person who had once sat in it. The hall opened into a wider space, a junction between two wings, with a large glass window overlooking an interior courtyard, choked by weeds. The moonlight drifted in through the tangled branches of a dead tree, casting broken shadows across the floor like scattered bones. It should have been beautiful, in a tragic way, but instead the scene made me feel as if I had stepped into a photograph of a world that no longer belonged to the living. As I stood there observing the courtyard, I felt a faint shift in the air behind me, a draft, subtle and slow, brushing the back of my neck. I turned, but there was nothing except darkness and the long corridor stretching back into the unseen. Yet the sensation didn't dissipate. It slithered under my skin, suggesting that something had moved, something silent, something that did not need light to navigate this place. My pulse began to race, not from fear, but from the unshakable certainty that whatever had created that shift in the air was still near, examining me, measuring the boundaries of my presence. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady myself. But the longer I stood still, the more I felt the hospital around me reorganizing itself, adjusting to my presence like an organism that had awakened after a long hibernation. I forced myself to move forward again, not out of bravery, but because standing still felt like an invitation for the unseen to draw nearer. The corridor to my right led deeper into the surgical wing, and the faint scent of old antiseptic clung to the air like a ghost. I followed it, my footsteps echoing softly, swallowed almost immediately by the thick silence. The walls were covered with peeling paint, the exposed layers showing the different eras the hospital had lived through. Each layer had once represented hope, renewal, progress. Now they were all curled and rotting, like memories refusing to let go. As I walked into the first surgical room, the metallic smell of rust mixed with something faintly sweet, something that made my stomach twist. The operating table stood in the center, surrounded by old equipment draped in dusty cloths. A single overhead lamp hung above the table, its cracked glass reflecting the moonlight that seeped in through a high window. The sight of the table made me pause. I felt something stir deep inside me, like a memory trying to surface but not fully forming. I approached the table slowly, feeling the temperature drop with each step. It wasn't normal cold, it was the kind that felt like fingertips tracing along your spine, reminding you that you were not alone. I ran my fingers gently along the rusted metal edge, and in that instant, a sharp image flashed through my mind. A figure lying on the table, skin pale, chest rising shallowly. But before I could focus or recognize anything, the vision disappeared, slipping from my grasp like fog. I stepped back, my breath unsteady. Whatever memory the room had ignited in me, it did not belong to my life, or at least not the life I remembered. And that thought lingered, unsettling and unwelcome. I exited the surgery room, continuing deeper into the wing. The hallway was narrow here, the ceiling lower, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of shadows. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, even though the fixtures had long since died. It was as if the sound did not come from the lights, but from somewhere else entirely, something using the memory of the lights to communicate. At the end of the hallway, a heavy double door stood slightly ajar. A soft, rhythmic tapping came from behind it, like something gently striking metal. I paused again, listening intently. The tapping continued, steady, unhurried, not demanding attention, but insisting on it. I pushed the door open with the tips of my fingers, letting the hinges groan, as if waking from a decades-long sleep. Inside was a long, narrow room lined with metal drawers, the morgue. The air was dense, almost syrupy, and the faint tapping now echoed off the metal surfaces. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me with a dull thud. The sound made the tapping pause for a moment, as though whatever was making it had become aware of my presence. Then it resumed, slower this time, deliberate. The moonlight filtered through a small barred window, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air like drifting stars. I approached the source of the sound, one of the drawers halfway down the right wall. It vibrated faintly with each tap, as though something inside was gently knocking. My whole body tensed. Yet, strangely, the fear that should have surged through me felt muted, filtered through a layer of something else, curiosity perhaps, or an unspoken recognition I couldn't explain. I placed my hand on the cold metal surface. For a moment the tapping stopped, then slowly, softly, 3 taps responded to my touch. Not random, not frantic, communicative. I felt a tremor run through me, not from fear but from the deep, inexplicable sense that whatever was inside that drawer was aware of me. Aware in a way that felt personal, as though it knew something about me that I did not yet know. I stepped back, unable to bring myself to open the drawer. Not yet. The morgue felt too still, too attentive, as if the room itself was waiting to see what I would do next. I turned and left, feeling the tapping resonate behind me as I walked away, now quicker, almost urgent, urging me to come back. But I didn't. Not yet. The hallway outside felt almost warm in comparison, and I allowed myself a shaky breath as I continued walking deeper into the hospital's forgotten heart. The building felt larger now, as though I had crossed into an area not entirely anchored to physical reality. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, and I could hear distant echoes that didn't align with any identifiable source. Shuffling, breathing, footsteps that belonged to no pattern. I reached the central staircase, its railings draped with cobwebs that shimmered in the moonlight. The stairs spiraled both upward and downward, disappearing into darkness. I hesitated, unsure which direction drew me more strongly, but then a faint whisper-like sound drifted from below, not a voice, but the soft, dragging noise of something moving slowly across the floor. I began descending. With each step, the air grew colder, the shadows grew thicker, clinging to the walls like living things. The staircase opened into a large sublevel that felt like the oldest part of the hospital. The ceiling was lower, the architecture cruder. The rooms down here had iron doors instead of wooden ones, small viewing slots instead of windows. It was the isolation ward. My heartbeat quickened as I walked past the first door. Something inside shifted, softly, like fabric brushing against stone. I glanced through the small barred opening and saw only darkness, but the sensation that something had moved was unmistakable. I passed the second door, then the third, each one radiating a faint, oppressive presence, as if the memories of those once locked inside still lingered, trapped, unable to leave. The fourth door was different. Its viewing slot had been forced open, the metal bent outward. I approached it cautiously, feeling the cold seep through the opening like a breath from the abyss. I leaned forward just enough to peer inside. A faint shape stood in the far corner of the room, not moving, not breathing, but unmistakably present. My breath caught, and for a moment the entire world seemed to constrict around me. The room felt impossibly deep, as though it stretched far beyond the physical boundaries of the hospital. The shape remained still, shrouded in shadow, its outline barely discernible, but the feeling it radiated was unmistakably familiar, uncomfortably so, in a way that made my stomach twist. I stepped back, unable to process what I had seen. There was something profoundly wrong about the figure in that room, wrong in a way that suggested it was not bound by the rules of the human world. As I turned to leave, a soft sound drifted from behind the door. A slow, careful step, then another, then a third. The figure was approaching the door. I forced myself to stay calm as I backed away, watching the darkness behind the viewing slot grow denser, as though something inside was drawing closer to the threshold between its world and mine. I felt an instinctual warning coil inside me, urging me to leave before the door fully registered my presence. I hurried back up the stairs, the oppressive cold chasing me like a tide. When I reached the main floor again, the air felt slightly lighter, though still heavy with the presence of unseen forces. I leaned against the wall, catching my breath, trying to steady my mind. But the moment I closed my eyes, I saw the outline of the figure in the isolation ward. Its stillness, its familiarity, its quiet but unmistakable awareness. Something about it resonated with a part of me I didn't understand yet. I began walking again, driven now not by aimless exploration, but by a subtle pull, like an invisible thread, tugging me towards something deeper, within the hospital. I passed rooms filled with abandoned beds, hallways choked with debris, staircases leading to collapsed ceilings. The hospital felt endless, as if it had grown new corridors and wings for the sole purpose of guiding me to where it wanted me to go. Eventually, I reached a heavy wooden door, different from the others. It was carved with intricate patterns, symbols I didn't recognize, but which stirred something ancient within me, something older than memory. I hesitated, feeling both dread and inevitability coiled together in my chest.
Then, slowly, I pushed the door open. A cold gust swept over me, and the room beyond was illuminated not by moonlight, but by a faint, bluish glow emanating from the center. The room was circular, with high stone walls that looked far older than the hospital itself. In the center stood a single object, a metal basin filled with water that glowed softly, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I stepped toward it, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. The closer I came, the warmer the air felt, as if the basin radiated its own strange energy. When I peered into the water, the surface rippled, forming shifting images that were not reflections of me, nor of the room. They were memories, but not mine, or perhaps not mine alone. Faces flickered across the water, faces I didn't know, yet felt I should. A child clutching a worn toy, a man whose expression was twisted with anguish. The images dissolved into a swirling mass of darkness, then reformed in the themes. Hospital rooms, fumed hospital rooms filled with shadows. All shadowed halls, it looked eerily familiar. A morgue drawer is slowly opening on a morgue drawer is slowly opening on its own. An isolation ward door trembling on its own. A morgue isolation ward door, trembling as if buzz. Turned inside desperately wanted to escape. Then the water stilled, and an image formed with perfect flagging light. My daughter's eyes were not.
My face, but not as I was now, pallor, eyes darker, expression hollow, as if life had been drained from me long ago. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The water rippled again, returning to its faint glow, but the image of that face, my face, but not mine, was burned into my mind. I felt the room shift around me, the walls tightening, the air thickening, the basin's glow brightened, casting strange shadows that bent in unnatural ways. I felt something stir behind me, and slowly I turned. The figure from the isolation ward stood in the doorway, closer now, clearer now. Its form indistinct, yet undeniably familiar, a mirror distorted by time and suffering. The outline of its face matched the one I had seen in the basin's water. My breath stilled. The truth settled over me like a shroud. This figure, this presence, it wasn't haunting me. It was following me, because it was tied to me, somehow, in some forgotten way. It stepped forward, and the room darkened as if its presence consumed the faint glow. I felt the invisible thread pulling tighter between us, binding us, stitching together two halves of something I did not yet understand. Then the basin's water erupted into light. A surge of energy swept through the room, knocking me backward, flooding my vision with blinding white. When the light faded, the room was empty. The figure was gone. The basin was dark, and I was alone, but not the same. Something inside me had shifted. Something had awakened. Something that knew this hospital. Something that belonged here. Something that had been waiting for me to return. And as I stepped out of the room and back into the shadowed corridor, I realized with chilling clarity, this was only the beginning. There were still secrets buried in these walls, and the hospital was not done with me yet. If this story pulled you deeper into the darkness, don't stop now. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next episode reveals why that ancient being knows my name and what it wants from me. The hunt has already begun.